Ed Miliband for Labour with us this morning. Always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Great to be with you.
Joining us. What are we going to do if Sudanese people try to come to the UK?
Well, look, I think it's much better to tackle these problems at root. So the first priority is obviously to get the British citizens out. And I'm glad the government is doing that. And this is obviously a very anxious time for the people who are there. The second priority is to work with other countries to see if this ceasefire can be extended. But, you know, the truth about this is that, you know, conflicts elsewhere in the world do have impacts on us. And that's why you need secure borders and you need a proper system in place for dealing with asylum and all those things. I'm afraid the bill being debated today in the House of Commons is not it.
Is the German Foreign Minister incorrect to criticise the British government for not acting quicker to bring out British citizens from Sudan?
Well, look, this is a complicated situation, and I think, as in any of these kind of circumstances, after the event, we all want to see whether there are lessons to be learned. You know, the embassy staff, as I understand it, were brought out because of a specific threat to them. The Americans, as I understand it, have not yet brought out their citizens. So let's, you know, I'm not in the business today of getting into criticising the government. I'm in the business of saying we need a plan from the government to get the British citizens out as quickly as possible in this ceasefire window. And then after the event, let's try and learn lessons about whether different routes could have been taken.
I understand that, but it's how helpful is it that German Foreign Minister criticising the British government at this time?
Well, look, I think the most helpful thing is to focus on the needs of the citizens, get them the information, get them out as quickly as possible, do everything we can to protect our people who are there.
Talk to me about this bill that's going through, the immigration bill that is going through Parliament further today. What aspects of the bill does Labour support?
Well, the bill's not going to work, Kay. We don't support the bill. And let me tell you why the bill's not going to work. The bill says that anyone who comes over on a small boat
illegally, according to
is going to be detained and returned, right? But it's not clear whether within 28 days. It's not clear where they're going to be returned to, because return agreements haven't been negotiated with some countries, but not with lots of countries.
From Albania,
the bill only, but Albania is the exception, not the rule.
But that's where a lot of people come from.
Well, that's where some of the people come from, but lots of other people come from Iraq and elsewhere via other countries. Okay, so that's the first thing. So they're going to be returned, but it's not clear where they're going to be returned to. There's no plan to deal with the backlog of claims. So a bill was passed a year ago by the government, which they said would stop the small boats. 45,000 people came over. Only 1% of those claims are dealt with. So they're now staying in hotels. Well, they haven't dealt with it, though, Gay. Thirdly, this bill doesn't deal with the criminal gangs, which actually are the source of this. Instead, it has gimmicks like the Rwanda policy, which is never going to meet the problems that we face. Now,
people trafficking is already a crime. So, you know, these smugglers...
But why don't we invest, instead of investing in Rwanda, which is not a solution, why don't we actually invest in cross-border action to tackle these gangs at source? Why don't we have a proper fast-track process for dealing with these asylum claims? Why aren't we actually focused on negotiating these return agreements? And so this bill's ineffective, but it's also unethical because it's actually trying to lock up children. And you've got Conservative MPs who are rightly saying today, look, this isn't going to work. You know, we want to stop the small boats. It's not good for our country. It's not good for the people coming over on the small boats. They're being exploited by the people traffickers. But this is not an answer. A gimmick, a con is not an answer.
Is it right by the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, to say that people coming over cannibalise communities and they have different lifestyles and values?
No. I mean, what's the point of that? I mean, what's the point of just sort of trying to kind of, you know, stir up kind of division?
Because he's saying they're damaging local communities.
Yeah, but we want to stop the small boats. But the point is, what we want from government is not sort of, you know, megaphone sort of statements. We want actual action, and we haven't had action. And they've had 13 years, Kay, and this goes to the wider issue of this local election campaign. These people have had 13 years in power. Our public services are worse. Our economy hasn't grown. We've got the worst cost of living crisis in 170 years on record. We've got the highest tax burden in our history.
You're going off the point.
No, I'm not going off the point because it's absolutely at the heart of this local election campaign. Does this government have real answers to the problems this country faces, or is it all just a con, a gimmick, and cheap headlines? And the answer is it is that. And actually what you want is a government that is serious with a proper plan to deal with the problems the country faces.
Is he not right, though, to say that the numbers of people, tens of thousands of people who are presently hoping for asylum, have not yet got it, are putting immense pressure on public services?
Yes, and yes, it's a problem, and yes, it's got to be dealt with. But let's have a debate about what real solutions are. Let's not have a government that comes along annually and says we've got a plan to stop the boats when all of the evidence is it's not going to work. I've looked at this in a lot of detail. It's not an answer to the problems that we face.
Risking his reputation. He says he will stop the boats. Are you saying this?
Actually, he's not. He's saying I'll stop the boats, but I'm not going to tell you when. Right? Doesn't that give you a clue, Kay, that it's gimmickry and a con? When somebody says I'm going to do it, and you say, well, when are you going to do it by? And he says, well, I can't tell you when it's going to happen by.
OK. Talk to me about Diane Abbott. Are you happy to sit next to her in the House of Commons?
Look, I think what she said was quite wrong. There can't be hierarchies of racism. Some people are more subject to racism than others. It was wrong, and she should never have said it. She's accepted she should never have said it. I think it's right that the Labour Party has taken action, suspended her, and there's going to be an investigation into it. I think the tragedy is that Diane's got actually a proud history of fighting racism and being a trailblazer for fighting racism, but what she said was terrible.
Are you happy to sit next to her?
Of course, I'm happy to sit next to her.
She's an anti-Semite.
Well, what she said was completely wrong and unacceptable. Look, I know Diane well. I don't think it's who she is actually.
She said it. And
well, I know, and she shouldn't have said it.
Sent it to a newspaper.
Yeah, I know, and I'm not defending.
And the boss is saying she's anti-Semitic.
Well, the Keir says it's an anti-Semitic statement, and I agree. And she shouldn't have said it. And absolutely, she shouldn't have said it. And the party has got to decide what action it takes, and it's for the party to decide that.
So you would accept her apology from what you're saying?
No, it's absolutely not for me to decide whether she's
happy to sit next to her.
Well, of course I'm happy to sit next to her, but the point is,
even though she's anti-Semitic,
it's a decision. This is a decision for the Labour Party. It's a decision for the Labour Party to make about whether Diane is a candidate. But what she said was completely unacceptable.
If you were still a boss, would you let her be a candidate?
I'm not going into that, Kate. It's not for me as a Labour MP to say whether another Labour MP should be a candidate at the next general election. There'll be a proper investigation into that.
OK, let me just talk to you briefly before I let you go about your brief. And
yes.
We're just experiencing the wettest March for 40 years, and yet we're hearing that there are going to be hosepipe bans. What's all that about?
Well, this is about the water companies that have been completely unregulated by this government. And,
But this is not going to change, is it? I mean, the climate is changing, and so this is going to get worse rather than better. What are we going to do about it?
Well, look, I mean, we've got to adapt as a country. But the thing I'm talking about today is something where the government promised action, another area they promised action, and have failed to deliver it, which is onshore wind.
Sure.
They said that they would lift the ban on onshore wind by the end of April. They've completely failed to do so. Why does that matter? Because onshore wind is now one of the cheapest forms of power we have. The ban that they introduced in 2015 has raised bills by £180 a year for every family in Britain, and yet still they're not doing anything about it. And it goes to a much bigger argument, which is, who's going to bring the change this country needs? Not a government that makes a promise, doesn't do anything about it. And so the answer on climate is we've got to lower energy bills, and the way to lower energy bills is to have that sprint for renewables, like onshore wind. We've got to adapt and invest in adaptation as a country. There's also big opportunities in relation to the jobs that will come from tackling this climate crisis, and we've got to invest in those, but we're not doing those things under this government.
And just briefly before I let you go, sorry I said that previously, but definitely this time.
No, I'm happy to stay.
The demonstrators who say onshore wind is not the right answer, what would you say to them?
the public support onshore wind. You know, the public the approval ratings of onshore wind are something that politicians would dream of. 78% of people, according to the government's own polling, support onshore wind. I don't think I've ever had a 78% approval rating. You know, I mean, look, you know,
you're always so self-deprecating.
The truth is, this is incredible. I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do have a 78% approval rating. But the well, anyway, we'd all dream of having the approval ratings that onshore wind has. 78%. So, look, this is actually popular, and what the government is doing is giving into a few Tory backbenchers who say, well, we can't have this.
NIMBYs is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's people who, you know, yeah, they just don't get the scale of the challenge that we face. They don't seem to get that this is actually now the cheap. You know, it's 9 times cheaper to have onshore wind than it is to have gas. Why are we not doing this as a country?
Great question. If the Prime Minister ever comes on this show, I'll ask him. It's always great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Mr. Miliband.